Some things look like small gestures and turn out to be everything. A pie carried across a field on a Tuesday morning. A wooden porch, a man who had forgotten how to expect good things, a woman who had been bringing good things for 3 years without being asked and without keeping score. Margaret Hail was 25 years old and had lived on the neighboring property her entire life. She knew the Callaway ranch the way she knew her own hands, the creak of the gate, the particular lean of the old barn, the way the morning light struck the Rocky Mountains to the west and turned everything briefly gold. She knew Thomas Callaway too. Thomas was 55, a widower, the kind of man a hard life makes either bitter or quiet. He had chosen quiet. He worked his land, kept his word, and had spent 3 years learning to live in a house that was too large for one person. Margaret had been bringing him food since Eleanor died, not out of pity, but out of the particular care you give someone you have watched carry something heavy for a long time. On a Tuesday morning in September, she brought him an apple pie. He looked at it, then at her, and smiled the rare smile that changed his whole face. "If only I were 10 years younger," he said. He meant it as a joke. She looked at him with an expression he didn't know how to read. Because for Margaret Hail, it wasn't a joke at all. Eleanor Callaway had died in the spring of 1880. Not suddenly. The illness had taken its time, the way illnesses do when they want to be thorough. Thomas had sat with her through all of it. When it was over, he buried her under the cottonwood east of the house and went back to work the next morning, because work was the only thing that still made sense. That was what people said about Thomas Callaway afterward. He went back to work the next morning. Some said it admiringly. Some said it with concern. Thomas himself had no opinion on the matter. He simply didn't know what else to do. Margaret had known Eleanor well. The two families had been neighbors for 30 years. When Eleanor died, something warm in the neighborhood went quiet. 2 weeks after the funeral, Margaret started bringing food. Not every day. She was running her own 40-acre property alone since her parents moved to Denver, but every Tuesday. A pot of stew, fresh bread, or a pie when the apples were good. Thomas always accepted it with the same words, "You didn't have to." Margaret always gave the same answer, "I know." They had this exchange so many times it became its own kind of conversation, a shorthand for something neither of them examined too closely. What Thomas noticed over those 3 years of Tuesdays was that Margaret Hail was extraordinarily capable. She ran her property alone without complaint. She fixed her own fences, negotiated her own cattle prices in Durango, and got better rates than men twice her age because she had done her research and knew exactly what things were worth. She was also, he had noticed, and immediately tried not to notice, very easy to be around. Their porch conversations were good. She had opinions and offered them without apology. She laughed at things he said that he hadn't been sure were funny. She asked about the cattle and actually listened to the answers. He had carefully filed all of this under the heading of good neighbor. It was a solid category. It required nothing of him. He intended to keep her there indefinitely, until the Tuesday morning she arrived with the apple pie. He said the thing he said, and she looked at him the way she looked at him, and the category began quietly, without his permission, to fall apart. The town of Durango had opinions about Margaret Hail. This was not surprising. Durango was a growing town in 1883. The railroad had arrived 2 years earlier, bringing commerce, newcomers, and the restless energy of a place that believed it was becoming something important. Growing towns have opinions about everything, especially about young women who run properties alone and don't seem to need saving. The opinion that concerned Margaret most was the one about Daniel Marsh. Daniel was 28, the son of the most prosperous merchant in Durango. He was handsome in the effortless way of men who have always known they were handsome. He had been making his interest in Margaret known since the previous spring, not aggressively, but persistently. He brought things by. He appeared at the market on the days she was there. He said the right things in the right tone. The town approved of him enthusiastically. He was young. He was prosperous. He would, everyone agreed, make an excellent husband for Margaret Hail, who was lovely and capable, but was going to wear herself out running that property alone if she wasn't careful. Martha Greer at the dry goods store told her directly, "That Marsh boy is a good man. You could do considerably worse." Margaret thanked her, bought her flour, and said nothing else. Her friend Ruth, recently married and therefore an authority on the subject, was more pointed. "He's asked about you 3 times this month, Margaret. 3 times. At what point do you give the man a chance?" "When I want to," Margaret said pleasantly. "And when will that be?" Margaret looked toward the mountains to the west. Those Colorado mountains, always there, always reliable, always exactly themselves. "I don't know," she said, which was not entirely true. She had made the pie on Monday evening with good apples from the south end of her property, the sweet ones that came in September. She made the crust the way her mother had taught her, cold butter, cold hands, don't overwork it. She crimped the edges with more care than the occasion strictly required. She carried it across the field on Tuesday morning under a sky so improbably blue it made everything below it look like a painting. Thomas was on the porch when she arrived, as he usually was on Tuesday mornings. He was drinking coffee and looking at the mountains with the particular stillness of a man who had made peace with mornings. She came up the steps and held out the pie. "Apple," he said with genuine appreciation. "September apples," she replied. "The good ones." He looked at the pie, then at her, and smiled, that slow, rare smile that made him look like a younger version of himself. "If only I were 10 years younger," he said lightly. Margaret looked at him. The Colorado morning held them both. A hawk turned overhead. The mountains stood unchanged. 10 years wouldn't be enough, she said. Before he could respond, she set the pie on the porch railing, said she had cattle to check, and walked back across the field. Thomas stood there for a long time, looking at the pie, then at her retreating figure, then at the pie again. Then he went inside, poured more coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and thought about what she had said. He thought about it for the rest of the day. If he was honest, he thought about it for considerably longer than that. Daniel Marsh arrived at Margaret's property the next day with flowers, not wildflowers, but arranged ones from a shop in Denver. He had planned this. Margaret received them with warmth and the quiet internal reaction of a woman who understood exactly what flowers from Denver meant. She put them in water, offered him coffee, and listened as he told her about his father's new railroad supply contract. He was not a bad man, pleasant, prosperous, and entirely reasonable. The town was right about that much. He asked if he could take her to the harvest social at the end of October. "I'll think about it," she said. It was kind, it was honest, it bought her time. After he left, she stood at the kitchen window, looking across the field toward the Callaway ranch. The late afternoon light lay golden on the barn. Somewhere out there, Thomas was checking the north fence line. She thought about 10 years wouldn't be enough, and whether she was being foolish. After a long time at the window, she concluded that being foolish mattered considerably less than she had once believed. Thomas Callaway was not a man who processed things quickly. He was thorough. He turned things over the way a good farmer turns soil, completely, looking at what lay underneath. He turned over her words for nearly 2 weeks. During that time he fixed the north fence, moved the cattle, repaired the barn roof, and had several one-sided conversations with his old horse Gerald about things that arrive when you are not expecting them. On the 14th day, he rode into Durango and heard at the feed store that Daniel Marsh had asked Margaret to the harvest social, and that she had said she would think about it, which everyone agreed was practically a yes. Thomas bought his supplies, rode home, put the horse away, and sat on the porch where the pie had been. He thought about a woman who had crossed that field every Tuesday for 3 years and never once asked for anything in return. He thought about Eleanor, who had possessed profound good sense and had once told him that stubbornness in the wrong direction was just stupidity with better posture. He looked at himself in the small mirror by the kitchen door, the gray hair, the lines, the 55 years of Colorado weather on his face, and had the conversation with his reflection that men have when they are trying to talk themselves into something. Their better judgment has already decided. His better judgment won. He put on his hat and walked across the field. She was mending the south fence when he appeared at the fence line between their properties, neutral territory. He rested his hands on the top rail and looked at her with the expression of a man who had decided something and was committing to it. "Margaret, Thomas, I've been thinking about what you said." "Which thing?" "You know which thing." She set down her tool and looked at him. 10 years wouldn't be enough, he said. "I've been thinking about what that meant." "And what did you conclude?" He was quiet for a moment. The afternoon light, the golden grass, the mountains, all of it held them. "I concluded that I don't know what you meant," he said carefully, "and that I'd like to." He looked at the fence rail, then back at her. "I'm 55 years old. I'm aware of what that means. I'm not going to pretend it's nothing, but I'd like to know if you're willing to tell me what you meant." She looked at this careful, quiet, thoroughly decent man who had spent 3 years accepting her Tuesdays without ever asking why. "It meant," she said, "that 10 years wouldn't make you any more of what I was looking for, because you're already exactly what I was looking for." The fence line between them was very quiet. A hawk crossed the sky above. Thomas Callaway felt something arrive in his chest that he had not expected to feel again, not an echo of something old, but something entirely new. The harvest social came and went. Margaret went. Thomas did not. He wasn't ready for that yet, and she understood without needing it explained. Daniel was charming and attentive. Martha Greer commented on Thomas's age. Margaret answered by telling her what Thomas had done the morning after the spring flood, arriving with lumber he couldn't spare and never mentioning it afterward. "That's not a small thing, Martha," she said. "That's the whole thing." She left the social early and rode home through the clear Colorado night. November brought cold, clean air and the first snow on the peaks. Thomas had been quietly working on the house. The porch railing was repaired. The east-facing kitchen window had a new frame. The spare room, once Eleanor's, was open, aired out, and gently cleared. On a Thursday, not a Tuesday, he knocked on her door. "I've been doing some work on the house," he said. "I know," she replied. "I notice everything." He turned his hat in his hands. "I want to ask you something properly. Daniel Marsh is a good man. He's 28 with good prospects. I cannot compete with reasonable arguments." "Then don't," she said. He met her eyes. "I'd like to come calling on you," he said, "if you'll allow it." Margaret looked at this man on her doorstep with his 55 years, his fixed porch railing, and his open spare room. "Thomas Callaway," she said, "I have been waiting for you to get here for approximately 3 years." He absorbed this. "I was thinking it through, I know," she said. "Come in, there's coffee." Durango had opinions, of course. Martha thought it unexpected. Ruth thought it romantic. Daniel Marsh was gracious and soon turned his attention elsewhere. Reverend Cole mentioned the age difference to Thomas directly. "She's 25, the Reverend said. In 20 years I'll be 75, Thomas replied, "and she will have had 20 years of someone who sees her clearly and means what he says. I think that's worth something." The Reverend performed the ceremony 4 months later without further comment. Their courtship was unhurried, the natural progression of two people who had known each other for years. There were suppers, long conversations, and Sunday rides through aspen groves and mountain meadows. Margaret moved into the Callaway Ranch in March of 1884. She brought her books, her mother's pie recipe, and a quiet competence that improved the ranch accounts within weeks. Thomas watched her settle into the house, the way water settles into its level, naturally, without announcement. One April evening she found him on the porch looking content. "Are you happy?" she asked. He looked at the mountains for a long moment. "I stopped expecting to be," he said. "That's not the same as not being." He turned to her. "I'm happy." She took his hand. They were married the following February in the Durango church. Margaret wore a deep green dress, the color of the Colorado pines. Thomas stood at the altar and understood, with the full weight of his years, that some things arrive when you have stopped looking for them, and are no less real for coming late. Their son William arrived in January 1885, named for Thomas's father. He had his mother's red hair and his father's quiet way of looking at the world. On a September morning in 1886, 3 years after the pie, Thomas was at the north fence when Margaret walked toward him carrying William on her hip. The boy looked at the mountains with serious curiosity. Thomas opened the gate, took his son, and looked at his wife. "If only I were 10 years younger," he said, not as a joke this time, but as the honest acknowledgment of a man who understood what he had almost missed. Margaret looked at him with the same expression that had started everything. 10 years wouldn't have been enough, she said. "I needed exactly you, exactly this." Thomas handed the boy back, closed the gate, and walked across the field with his family in the bright Colorado morning, grateful, past all calculation and all arithmetic of age, that he had not let it pie in a foolish joke pass him by. Thomas Callaway almost talked himself out of the best thing that ever happened to him, not out of stubbornness or pride, but out of simple arithmetic. He counted the years between them and decided the distance disqualified him. He was being responsible. He was being realistic. He was wrong. Age is real. It carries real weight. But Thomas had mistaken the arithmetic of years for the arithmetic of value. Margaret counted differently. She counted the man who showed up with lumber the morning after a flood, the man who said what he meant and meant what he said, the man who smiled rarely and meant it every time. Don't let the numbers on the calendar convince you that what you have to offer isn't enough. It might be exactly enough. It might be precisely what someone has been waiting for across a field on a Tuesday morning with a pie in her hands.